3 ministers, 7 hours, one president who dared to expose them all. Tonight we take you inside a nation where injustice is routine corruption, is culture, and silence is the currency of survival, until Ibrahim Traoré shatters the quiet. Picture a stormlit border, a dying soldier's whisper, and a flash drive so explosive it could burn a government to ash. Feel the pulse of midnight as a lone leader chooses truth over safety, justice over loyalty, and turns his palace into a battleground. But before we march into that war, remember this: the story you're about to hear is a work of narrative fiction, yet every gasp of outrage, every surge of hope it sparks, is painfully real for anyone who has ever stared down prejudice, violence, or betrayal. If you've ever wondered how far you would go to defend what's right when the traitors sit an arm's length away, stay with us. Because Ibrahim's 7-hour reckoning isn't just his fight, it's a mirror held up to all of us, and the reflection might be terrifying. The rain was relentless, fat, warm drops pelting the cracked earth like bullets from above. It hadn't rained in weeks, and now the sky seemed to be weeping with a fury it had held back too long. Thunder cracked overhead, jagged streaks of lightning briefly igniting the night into silver chaos. On a narrow, unpaved road near the northern border of Burkina Faso, a military checkpoint stood under a flickering floodlight. 3 soldiers soaked to the bone waved down a truck painted with the markings of the Ministry of Health. Its faded logo was peeling, and the windshield wipers squealed against the rain like fingernails on glass. "Medical delivery," the driver mumbled, barely making eye contact. He was too calm, too dry. Colonel Issa Sawadogo, the most senior officer on duty, narrowed his eyes. Something felt off. The manifest listed vaccines and first aid kits, but the back of the truck was padlocked from the inside and the vehicle bore no sign of GPS logs. That wasn't standard procedure. "Open it," he ordered, waving his torch toward the rear. The driver hesitated. That hesitation cost lives. In an instant, 2 men burst out from under the tarp inside the truck, AK-47s blazing. One soldier dropped with a scream. Another never made a sound. Sawadogo dove behind a stack of concrete blocks, returning fire. Bullets ripped through the night, flashing like electric death between the cracks of thunder. When it was over, 3 men were dead. The attackers fled, disappearing into the storm. The truck abandoned. Sawadogo, however, was still breathing, but just barely. A dark stain was spreading across his chest, and each ragged breath was a losing battle. His second-in-command rushed to his side. "Colonel, stay with me. Help is coming." But the colonel shook his head, weakly, eyes wide, as if seeing something not in front of him, but behind him within his own government. Tell the president," he gasped, fingers trembling. "Don't trust them." His voice cracked. The rain didn't hide the tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "They're inside. All inside." He fumbled with his vest pocket, pulling out a mud-spattered micro SD card sealed in plastic. His blood-slicked hand clenched it like a final act of defiance against something larger, something monstrous. "Give this to Ibrahim," he whispered, voice barely a breath. "Everything is on there." A second later, Colonel Sawadogo's body went still, eyes frozen in a look of both fear and relief, like a man who had finally told the truth he'd been dying to say. The lieutenant stared at the card in his palm. It looked ordinary, harmless, but the colonel had just died protecting it. 2 hours later, Presidential Palace, Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone in his private study, the only light coming from a single desk lamp. His face was unreadable, but his knuckles were white around the flash drive. He hadn't spoken since receiving it. The room was silent save for the low hum of a surveillance drone still circling the border region. Outside, the rain battered the palace windows like a warning. He inserted the card into a secure laptop. Folders open. Dozens. Then hundreds. Surveillance photos, bank statements, gagged audio recordings, and then a photo. His own Minister of Health smiling as she shook hands with a man wearing the colors of a South American cartel. Behind them, crates marked urgent medical supply. Ibrahim leaned back in his chair, thunder rolling outside. This wasn't foreign corruption. This was treason. And it had just walked into his cabinet meeting hours ago, smiling, joking, calling him brother. Ibrahim Traoré dismissed the last aide at 01:13 a.m., waited for the echo of footsteps to fade, then sealed the study door and killed the overhead lights. Only the desk lamp remained a lone circle of amber in a sea of darkness. Rain still hammered the palace roof, a metronome for the thoughts racing in his skull. He slid the micro SD card into a secure laptop, keyed in 2 layers of biometrics, and pressed enter. The screen flashed, hesitated, almost as if even the computer needed a second to brace itself, then flooded with folders time-stamped over 18 months. He opened the first file. A still image materialized his Minister of Health, stepping from a black SUV whose license plate belonged to the ministry's emergency response fleet, even though funding for that fleet had supposedly run dry last quarter. Another clicked night vision footage of the same minister inside an abandoned warehouse, shaking hands with a heavy-set man in a Colombian football jersey, smiles broad back slapped like brothers reunited. Thunder outside swallowed the president's quiet exhale. Next folder, bank PDFs. Column after column of wire transfers, $1.2 million from Medcare Global, $850,000 from Sierra Export, each arriving 2 days before cabinet votes on procurement budgets. Ibrahim scrolled faster. The numbers blurred, yet the pattern rang clear. Every deposit followed by a state contract, every contract by another deposit. His pulse thudded in his ears. The storm seemed to move inside his chest. He switched to audio. A hiss, then a voice he recognized too well, Minister of Commerce, Abdul Compaoré. Si, senor, the Border Patrol schedule is unchanged. The convoy will pass at 2:00. The colonel can be trusted. A second voice, Spanish, amused. Buen trabajo, ministro. Remember, loyal dogs are fed. Disloyal ones are replaced. Laughter. Click. The file ended. Ibrahim sat frozen index finger, still hovering above the trackpad, as though any movement might fracture the fragile silence. A new window auto-popped facial recognition highlights. 5 ministers, 2 deputy chiefs, 1 Supreme Court judge, all tagged high confidence. A cartel organizational chart overlaid like cancer cells mapped onto a healthy organ. Only the organ was his government. He leaned back, rubbed the bridge of his nose. 12 hours ago, he joked with these people about football scores. Now he wondered how many had laughed because they'd already bought the referee. The laptop fan whirred louder, as if protesting the weight of its revelations. Ibrahim reached across his desk and tapped a Bluetooth speaker. Somber strings filled the room, Mahler's Fifth Third Movement, a ritual he reserved for crises. The music's restless urgency wrapped around the images on screen, tying them to a single terrifying question. Is this my government or a cartel? For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to feel the betrayal, not as president, but as a man who had believed in those smiles. Then he straightened shoulders, squared against the gloom. He opened one final file. It was a payment ledger, but this time the recipient column listed shell companies traced to his own Minister of Transport, and shockingly to Colonel Sawadogo's younger brother. The breath left him in a jagged whisper. Loyalty, it seemed, ran on a meter like any taxi in Ouagadougou. Ibrahim closed the laptop, locking the darkness back inside its aluminium shell. Raindrops still drummed the windows, but their rhythm had changed. Now they sounded like the ticking of a countdown. He stood, eyes fixed on the door to the war room beyond. Tomorrow, he thought, the real storm begins. The rain tapered to a misty whisper, but inside the study the air felt heavier, as if the storm had slipped beneath the door and settled on Ibrahim Traoré's shoulders. He paced the length of the room, each measured stride scuffing the antique rug his father had bought in Bamako the year Ibrahim was born. That rug suddenly seemed like a line he kept crossing back and forth, duty and doubt, resolve and regret. On the desk, the closed laptop glimmered like a sealed casket, and he could almost feel the secrets inside thumping against the aluminium, begging to be let loose. He paused at the window. Low clouds crawled across the capital, obscuring the moon-wrapping Ouagadougou in the same suffocating darkness that now engulfed his thoughts. Expose them and the country explodes. Spare them and the rot spreads. There was no middle path. These were men and women he had laughed with over pepper soup, people who had cradled his newborn daughter and toasted his election victory. How do you prosecute family memory answered with the smell of gunpowder and dust? He was 7 when his father, Captain Alassane Traoré, returned from the front lines of the anti-colonial resistance. Ibrahim used to polish the man's scuffed boots, fascinated by the half-healed scar zigzagging up his calf. One rainy evening, Captain Traoré sat him down and told him that real wars are won or lost long before the first shot, because betrayal travels faster than bullets. A week later, Alassine's best friend, a fellow freedom fighter, sold the unit's position for a sack of French francs. 53 men died in an ambush. His father survived but walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and with a deeper wound Ibrahim rarely saw, but always felt festering beneath stoic smiles. Now the son stood in the very palace his father had once called an unattainable dream and faced the same specter of treachery. If I do nothing, he thought, I become that coward who let a cartel hollow out the state. If I strike, I ignite chaos, currency dives, allies balk, citizens panic. Some will call it a purge. Others will try to kill me before dawn. He imagined headlines: President starts witch hunt, coup rumors swirl. He imagined the hollow disappointment in his daughter's eyes if she learned he had known and kept silent. He rubbed his temples, but the images from the card kept bleeding through ministers exchanging envelopes in candlelit rooms, crates of stolen syringes piled beside white bricks, stamped with a scorpion logo, Sawadogo's lifeless stare in the rain. The weight of those pictures pressed against his ribs until breathing felt like confession. A wall clock ticked past 02:00. He returned to the desk, lifted the ornate letter opener, an old French cavalry dagger he had kept more as irony than ornament. Its blade caught a shard of lamplight, and he considered how simple a cut could be: sever a tie, bleed a promise, start a war. Outside, lightning flickered on the horizon, silent now, as if the sky itself held its breath for what he might do next. He set the dagger down with care, straightened the lapels of his rain-damp jacket, and exhaled the last vestige of doubt. The decision had always been inevitable. It merely needed to be spoken to become real. Drawing himself to full height, he felt the echo of his father's limp in his own steady stance, and let the word justice settle like iron behind his sternum. Tomorrow, he murmured, voice low but unshaking, we burn it all. The villa chosen for tonight's gathering perched on a limestone escarpment just outside Ouagadougou, its columned facade glowing amber beneath discreet security lamps. From the road, the place looked abandoned, storm shutters drawn, drive gate chained, but a rear service entrance admitted a steady trickle of staff who spoke in clipped whispers and never met a guest's eye. Deep inside, in a library paneled with Congolese mahogany, three of Burkina Faso's most powerful ministers lounged beneath a slow-turning ceiling fan, the hush broken only by the ticking of an antique pendulum clock that had once belonged to a French governor. At the head of the table sat Dr. Mary Traoré, Minister of Health, draped in a dove-gray boubou that matched the softness of her smile. In the press, she was Mother Marie, the physician who championed rural vaccination drives and wept on camera after every cholera outbreak. Yet here the gentle mask slipped. Her eyes were cool, appraising the eyes of someone who could calculate cubic meters of hidden cargo faster than most surgeons could count sutures. Before her lay a leather folio stamped with a red cross. Inside were route maps, port codes, and the night's true agenda. To her right reclined Umaru Saradogo, Minister of Transport, swirling ice in a crystal tumbler. He still wore his neatly pressed military fatigues, a habit left over from his days as a logistics officer, though the metals now clinked more in boardrooms than on battlefields. The irony of his presence was not lost on anyone. Umaru's elder brother, Colonel Issa Saradogo, had died guarding the same frontier this cartel planned to breach. But Umaru never mentioned his brother in these rooms. Here sentiment was bad business. He cleared his throat. The convoy leaves Bobo Dioulasso at 02:00, he said, voice low, unhurried. 2 decoy ambulances in front, 1 behind. If gendarmerie waved them through, we're clear to the coast by dawn. Opposite him lounged Abdou Compaoré, Minister of Commerce, fingers steepled under his chin. Unlike the others, Abdou rarely touched paperwork. Numbers existed in his head like constellations only he could read. Bankers called him the architect because he designed shell companies the way others design cathedrals. Every brace invisible, every facade immaculate. He offered a thin smile. Our Colombian partners expect the first tranche of payment within 48 hours of departure. I trust Marie that cold chain invoices will justify the transfer. Corré's lips curled. 1 million doses of anti-malarial urgently rerouted for flooding victims. No auditor will argue with Mercy. She pushed a flash drive toward him. Bills of lading temperature logs, even photos of smiling nurses unloading phantom crates. Use whichever charity seal looks trendiest this season. A chuckle rippled around the table, 3 wolves congratulating one another on perfect sheep costumes. Outside, thunder muttered, but the library's thick glass muffled the threat. Abdu tapped the flash drive against the table's lacquered surface. There is one complication, he said, and the humor drained from the room. The president's new border surveillance drones. They recorded movement near Sector Delta last night. Nothing actionable, but the pattern worries me. Umaru shrugged. Patterns don't testify. People do. And the only person who saw our trucks last night is already buried with honors. The words hung heavy, his brother's death reduced to an accounting line. No one spoke of guilt. Guilt was a luxury forfeited when the first payoff cleared. Dr. Traoré smoothed the sleeve, returning the group to business. Let us remember the scale 10 metric tons, street value 400 million euro. With that, we buy Elections Foundation's sainthood. 1 night of risk for a decade of power. She snapped the folio shut. Gentlemen, raise your glasses to cargo that heals by day and conquers by night. Crystal clinked. Self-assured smiles circled the table, every face certain the storm outside could not touch them. None noticed the small red light blinking above the bookshelf, a pinhole camera no larger than a coat button installed by a junior maintenance worker whose name they would never bother to learn. By the time the public began whispering about missing vaccines and phantom road repairs, the machine was already humming like clockwork, precise, silent, and devastating. What looked like mismanagement was in truth orchestration. The system was not broken. It had been repurposed, re-engineered to serve a darker empire hiding behind official seals and bureaucratic jargon. At the core of the operation was logistics disguised as compassion. Ministry of Health cargo convoys, normally reserved for medical relief, were transformed into the perfect vessels for high-value narcotics. The white trucks bore red crosses on their flanks, slogans like, "Care without borders," splashed across the canvas in bold letters. Local police were trained to wave these vehicles through without inspection. After all, who delays medicine for dying children? The drugs were vacuum-sealed and packed in custom compartments hidden beneath crates of saline antibiotics and expired malaria pills. The crates themselves were tagged with falsified barcodes traceable on ministry databases, all leading to fabricated delivery sites that didn't exist. Some listed rural clinics that had been shuttered for years due to lack of funding. One truck route even listed a hospital that had burned down in 2019. To shield the operation, layers of forged documentation were meticulously maintained. Procurement approvals carried the forged signature of deputy directors who had long since retired. Budget ledgers reflected millions allocated for pandemic readiness and disaster zone reallocation. These lines were designed not to disappear, but to look boring, buried beneath a haze of acronyms and policy jargon only the most persistent auditor would dare untangle. No one ever did. The Ministry of Transport's role was equally crucial. Umaru Saradogo's office issued priority clearance tags for the modified trucks authorization codes that made the vehicles invisible to checkpoints and drone patrols. Any agent who raised questions was gently reassigned to remote provinces or suddenly found their career stalled without explanation. At least 2 customs officers had simply vanished. Their homes were left untouched, dishes still on the table, pets unfed. Investigations faded faster than morning mist. Then came the financial network, a masterpiece of engineered opacity. The street revenue was laundered through shell charities, import-export ghost firms, and NGOs with glossy websites and fake photo galleries. One such NGO, Clean Wells for Africa, was donating boreholes to villages that no longer had people. Swiss accounts under fake names, often drawn from the death registries, received regular deposits routed through 3 continents in under 40 minutes. The money was then reinvested into real estate in Portugal, crypto wallets in Dubai, and offshore bonds handled by middlemen who never met their clients in person. Meanwhile, in the real Burkina Faso, the cost of betrayal was paid in silence and suffering. At a clinic in Gawa, nurses turned away mothers clutching feverish children because the last box of vaccine hadn't arrived in 2 months. In Dedugu, a midwife used a sewing needle and vodka to perform an emergency C-section because the sterile kit had never been replaced. And on a crumbling highway near to town, a bus overturned into a ravine, killing 12. The road had collapsed from rain-damaged repairs had been funded and completed on paper 6 months prior. In village after village, frustration turned into fatalism. This is just how Africa is, one farmer muttered on camera, standing in front of a broken water pump promised by 5 different political campaigns. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the money meant to fix that pump now fueled a minister's penthouse in Monaco. Betrayal in this system wasn't personal, it was procedural, a routine, a monthly transfer, a fake signature, a staged press conference, and like the drugs that paid for it, it was delivered in silence, wrapped in the illusion of care. President Ibrahim Traoré had faced many nights without sleep, but none quite like this. The revelations from Colonel Sawadogo's memory card had turned his government into a minefield where every smile might hide a blade. Trust once freely given now had to be measured in blood and sacrifice. He couldn't act publicly, not yet. The cartel had eyes everywhere. One misstep, one careless word, and the criminals would vanish into the shadows with evidence-burned accounts emptied and witnesses silenced. So he did what leaders rarely have the courage to do. In time, he built a war plan in silence. For 43 days, he operated from the shadows of his own presidency. Every meeting with suspected ministers was recorded. Every budget proposal combed through by forensic accountants he trusted more than his own security detail. He summoned midnight reports from rural customs posts, rerouted drones to hover over facilities listed as non-essential, and quietly reactivated defunct surveillance programs his predecessors had mothballed to protect allies. In the quietest hours, he began assembling something far more dangerous than a rebellion, a clean cell inside a dirty system. He called it the map. On the west wall of his private study, he had a custom-built intelligence board installed behind a false bookshelf. It was analog deliberately, no digital footprint, no risk of a cyber breach. Red threads ran from ports to clinics, from shell companies in Accra to warehouses in Bobo Dioulasso. Yellow pins marked border patrols that had gone missing. Blue tags indicated civil servants quietly reassigned after raising questions. Over time, the chaotic lines began to form a pattern, a living anatomy of treason, but maps needed guides. And that's when he reached for a name he hadn't spoken in 2 years, Colonel Malik Demiba. Demiba had once been Traoré's rising star, sharp, fearless, incorruptible. But in a heated cabinet session, he had questioned the wisdom of a deployment plan, publicly challenging Ibrahim in front of international observers. For that, he was stripped of his command and exiled to a low-level logistics unit on the border, far from the corridors of power. It had been a political move, a reminder of authority. But now Ibrahim saw that while others had compromised for comfort, Demiba had stayed clean-cut off, but untainted. He summoned the colonel under the cover of darkness at an unmarked safe house outside Ouagadougou. No aides, no phones, no uniforms. "You know why you're here?" Traoré asked. Demiba's reply was swift. "I assume it's not for an apology." "No," Traoré said. "It's for a war." The president laid out the evidence. Demiba listened without blinking, his jaw tightening only once at the mention of Sawadogo's name. The two men had trained together. "What do you need?" he asked when the briefing ended. "A team," Traoré replied. "Yours, your command, your loyalty." "You had that," Demiba said evenly, "until you didn't want it." Traoré didn't flinch. "Then this is how I earn it back." And just like that, Operation Phoenix was born. The name wasn't accidental. A phoenix burns violently before it rises. The mission was clear: infiltrate the cartel's infrastructure without alerting the ministers, gather irrefutable evidence, neutralize all active supply lines, and deliver public arrests before the first denial could be crafted. Every move had to be simultaneous, every raid backed by sealed warrants and military precision. There could be no leaks, no last-minute escapes, no manufactured alibis. Phoenix would either cleanse the rot or be consumed by it. Demiba accepted. Within a week, he had handpicked 27 officers from scattered units, men and women, with spotless records and nothing to lose. No one above the rank of major, no political connections, just operatives who still believed in a country that had forgotten how to believe in itself. And as Traoré stared at the map one final time that night, he whispered to no one, "You burned my faith. Now I'll burn your empire." The first phase of Operation Phoenix did not begin with a bang, but with silence. Calculated, deliberate, weaponized silence. President Ibrahim Traoré signed the order at 03:27 a.m. on a Tuesday under low lamplight, his signature fluid, but his expression granite. The directive gave Colonel Demiba and his intelligence cell full authority to intercept all internal communications tied to the Ministries of Health, Transport, and Commerce without judicial notice, without oversight, and above all, without delay. The orders were transmitted using hand-delivered, unmarked envelopes. No digital traces, no risk of preemption. Within 48 hours, scramblers were installed inside ministerial routers. Data mirroring quietly activated and mobile traffic cloned at network level through silent cooperation from a foreign telecom technician who'd been paid not in cash, but in diplomatic favors. Every incoming call, outgoing email, and WhatsApp voice note was now a thread waiting to be pulled. And what a web it was. The first discoveries weren't smoking guns, they were subtle bruises under makeup. One document from the Ministry of Health listed 1.2 million vaccines ordered from a European supplier that no longer existed. The procurement forms bore freshly scanned signatures, but the date field still showed the default 01/01/2020. Another file uncovered a manifest for medical supplies being rerouted through a fish processing plant in Lome, Togo, a location that, according to satellite imaging, hadn't processed a single fish in over 2 years. Then came a customs authorization request from the Ministry of Transport, requesting emergency humanitarian corridor access for 5 medical trucks scheduled to cross into Mali. But the registration numbers didn't match any vehicles in the ministry's fleet. Further digging revealed those numbers belonged to SUVs seized in a prior smuggling bus vehicles currently held in a government impound yard. Or so the public thought. The layers of fraud were intricate, designed not just to deceive, but to exhaust anyone trying to untangle them. The operation wasn't relying on clumsiness. It was powered by precision masked as incompetence. But the breakthrough came late one evening when a low-level operative monitoring VoIP traffic flagged an encrypted conversation between a line registered to Minister Abdul Compaoré and a foreign number originating from Medellin, Colombia. Voice decryption took hours, but the audio that emerged was unmistakable, grainy, but chilling. Shipments on schedule, Compaoré's voice said, measured and confident. Vaccines already cleared. Customs signed off last night. Route is clean. The other voicemail, older, with a thick Colombian accent, replied, Good. You've done well, Ministro. Keep the schedule tight. El Señor doesn't like improvisation. A pause. Then the Colombian voice added almost casually, And if anyone on your end becomes difficult. Compaoré's reply was cold-clipped. We've handled worse. You just focus on payment. My people will handle loyalty. The room where the file was played deep beneath the presidential palace went still. Even Demiba, who had witnessed atrocities in 2 civil conflicts, said nothing for several seconds. They had it. Not speculation, not suspicion, evidence. The Minister of Commerce was coordinating logistics for a transnational drug cartel using state infrastructure. And he wasn't just facilitating, he was issuing threats. That single call unlocked a cascade of intel burner numbers that had previously gone unnoticed were now being traced. Procurement records flagged in past audits were now matched to voice patterns and timetables. Everything began to align. Traoré, upon hearing the clip, didn't shout. He didn't even move. He merely leaned forward and said, This isn't corruption anymore. This is occupation. What had once been rumors and fragments was now a living conspiracy, recorded, time-stamped, and unfolding in real time. The first shadow had emerged, and it was cast not by a criminal hiding in the jungle or slums, but by a man who wore a silk tie to every cabinet meeting and smiled into every camera as he talked about economic progress. Now they knew where to look, and they knew exactly who they were hunting. Night in Bobo Dioulasso falls quickly cloaking the industrial outskirts in a charcoal hush that even street dogs respect. At 02:08 a.m., 3 unmarked trucks rolled through a service gate, left conveniently ajar. The lock had been swapped earlier by an undercover maintenance worker. Colonel Demiba sat up front, radio-muted eyes tracking the flicker of sodium lamps sliding across the windshield. His 27-person task force was divided into 2 units. Raven 1 heading for the warehouse complex rumored to house vital medical stock, and Raven 2 bound for a cramped downtown clinic that never treated a single patient yet processed millions in invoices. The raid doctrine was simple: enter fast, secure evidence, exit before sunrise. No sirens, no barking orders, no social media spectacle, just silent precision, the kind that leaves neighbors wondering whether they dreamt the commotion. As Raven 1 breached the warehouse's side entrance, the first thing that hit them was the smell: disinfectant laced with diesel, the olfactory camouflage of illicit cargo. Infrared goggles painted the interior in ghostly greens. Rows of aluminum shipping containers stretched like metallic coffins beneath dangling IV bags staged for authenticity. A bolt cutter snapped. Container doors swung open. Instead of syringes and gauze bricks of pressed cocaine, each stamped with a scorpion insignia, gleamed under flashlights, nearly 2 tons worth, enough to bankroll a small war. Behind that sat a mobile chemistry lab: reflux condensers, acetone drums, stacks of lithium batteries cannibalized for pseudoephedrine extraction. Stainless steel benches were still warm, flasks half-full, timers paused mid-process. Whoever worked here had left in a hurry, likely tipped off that routine customs audits were increasing, but not fast enough to clear the evidence. Damiba's second-in-command photographed every label, every lot number, then scanned inventory codes that matched procurement orders signed by Dr. Marie Traoré herself. A forged cold chain manifest lay on a clipboard bearing the Ministry of Health letterhead and the presidential seal, pixelated as if copied too many times, arrogant in its sloppiness. In a locked filing cabinet, they discovered spreadsheets detailing payout splits: 20% to logistics, 30% to overseas suppliers, 15% to community outreach, a euphemism for bribes. 3-line items were initials only: MCUSAC, with Swiss IBANs attached. The paper trail was no longer circumstantial. It was a confession in ledger form. Meanwhile, Raven 2 slipped through the rear alley of the so-called Marigold Urban Clinic, lights kept dim to feign a night shift. Inside, reception desks were spotless, but patient files contained nothing but photocopied stock images of smiling families, a crude attempt at legitimacy. Past the consultation rooms, a reinforced door opened to a windowless office humming with servers. Hard drives whirred as data cloning devices captured months of financial transfers funneled through shell charities. One terminal still displayed a secure messaging chat, a final unread line from El Señor saying, "Stay invisible until the storm passes." Too late. Raven 2 also uncovered stacks of brand new passports from 5 African nations, each affixed with biometric chips, and pre-stamped exit visas, ready-made identities for ministers on the run. In a small refrigerator, vials of genuine measles vaccine were stored beside blocks of dry ice. The image was almost poetic: life-saving serum chilled next to devices of slow destruction. An evidence tech muttered, "This is how they keep the PR machine alive, show a little charity while selling death by the ton." Both units exfiltrated before 0430, leaving only barcode seals indicating government seizure. No alarms, no shootouts, just the echo of boots fading into rain-slick darkness. On the ride back, Demiba reviewed secure photos, cocaine lab equipment, forged invoices, Swiss account printouts. One picture showed an invoice marked emergency maternal kits, overlaying a pallet of narcotics. He forwarded it to the president with a single caption, "Your proof." Phase 2. Minutes later, Ibrahim replied, Phase 2. Dawn. The silent raids had spoken loud enough. By the time the last encrypted image from Bobo Dioulasso reached the presidential palace, it was 1:05 a.m. Ibrahim Traoré stood over a war table scattered with dossiers, surveillance stills, and hand-drawn movement charts, lit by the dim glow of a single tactical lamp. The air in the room was dry and electric, like the pause before a lightning strike. Colonel Damiba, still in field gear, stood across from him, boots, muddy eyes, sharp but sleepless. Neither man spoke for several seconds. They didn't have to. Everything they needed was already in front of them. Evidence too damning to deny and a clock ticking too fast to ignore. The intercepted shipping logs confirmed what they feared: a final cocaine shipment was scheduled to arrive in less than 7 hours, routed through the same corridor that had already bled too many secrets. If the ministers caught wind of the raids or sensed suspicion, They would abort the shipment and torch every link between themselves and the cartel. Worse, they might flee. And worst of all, they might retaliate against witnesses, against the president, against the country itself. This was the last window. The door was closing. "We move at 8, Ibrahim said quietly. "Cabinet meeting. Full attendance mandatory." Demiba nodded. "Do we take them before or after the presentation?" After, Traoré replied. "Let them sit. Let them feel safe. Let them talk." There was a tension behind the words, not hesitation, but the gravity of betrayal. These weren't faceless enemies. These were his ministers. People he had appointed, defended, trusted with the nation's future. They had toasted victories together, laughed over childhood memories of the Sahel, promised reform in front of cameras, and now their fingerprints were on forged invoices, their voices caught coordinating drug routes, their bank accounts swollen with blood money. He reviewed the timeline one last time at 6:30 a.m. The calls would go out, 5 ministers summoned under the guise of a classified security meeting. Between 7 jurors and 745 plainclothes operatives would secure all major exits from the palace. Technical teams would set up recording equipment in the cabinet chamber, ensuring every word was documented. Meanwhile, secondary teams would simultaneously seize bank accounts, raid remaining facilities, and monitor known cartel associates attempting to leave the country. Everything hinged on synchronization. Justice had to be swifter than self-preservation. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the treetops around the palace like whispers of the ancestors. Ibrahim turned to a map of the capital pinned on the wall. The red pins, the blue circles, the yellow notes. It was no longer an investigation. It was an execution plan. Not of bodies, but of illusions. The illusion of loyalty, the illusion of service, the illusion of government without consequence. 7 hours, Demiba said quietly, more to himself than anyone. Ibrahim didn't look away from the map. His voice was steady, the tone of a man who had already buried doubt. "No arrests yet," he said. "No warnings, no panic." Then he stepped back, folded his hands behind his back, and issued the final order. "Let them walk into the trap themselves." Under the towering columns of the presidential palace, the heavy mahogany doors to the cabinet chamber creaked open at exactly 7:58 a.m. One by one, the ministers entered, their footsteps soft against the marble floors, their expressions composed if a little fatigued. Emergency cabinet meetings were not unusual in Burkina Faso, especially in a region where threats shifted daily and chaos was often the default. They assumed this was just another security briefing, another hollow discussion on border skirmishes or foreign aid delays, or maybe even the fallout from the recent customs raids they'd quietly noted. None of them suspected they were walking into a snare lined with truth and silence. Dr. Marie Traoré was the first to arrive, dressed in her usual cream-colored suit, pearls glinting at her neck. She gave a faint nod to the guards, then took her seat near the middle of the long table. Her face carried the soft dignity of a woman revered by the public, Burkina Faso's angel of rural health. Only her eyes, sharp and watchful, betrayed her inner restlessness. Minutes later, Umaru Saradogo entered briskly, adjusting his cufflinks with military precision. He glanced once at the empty seat marked for the Minister of Defense, an old habit from his officer days, then took position directly across from Dr. Traoré. His jaw clenched slightly when he saw her. No words were exchanged. Last to arrive was Abdou Compaoré. Always the quietest among them, he moved like a man used to operating behind closed doors. With neatly parted hair and a charcoal gray suit tailored in Paris, he gave no indication that his hands were soaked in cartel ink. He exchanged pleasantries with no one, his phone buzzing softly in his coat pocket, before he silenced it. The doors shut, guards posted outside, and yet no president appeared, not for the first minute or the second. The ministers sat surrounded by portraits of former leaders and golden-framed declarations of independence. The silence thickened. At first it felt like protocol, perhaps Traoré was reviewing a final report. But by the end of the second minute, that silence began to bite. Compaoré glanced at his watch. Traoré opened a notepad. Saradogo crossed his arms. Then finally footsteps. Deliberate, unhurried. Ibrahim Traoré entered the chamber alone, no aides, no documents, no ceremonial greetings. He wore a plain navy suit, sleeves rolled just enough to show his wristwatch, a gift from his late father. He took his seat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He simply looked at each of them, his gaze steady, his silence now a deliberate living force. Seconds passed like hammer strikes. Then finally he leaned forward, folded his hands on the table and asked, "Do you know what betrayal smells like?" The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. No one answered immediately. Traoré offered a tight smile. "Mr. President, I'm not sure I understand the question." Traoré cut her off with a glance so sharp it cleaved through pretense. "I think you do. I think all of you do." Saradogo shifted in his seat. Compaoré narrowed his eyes slightly, calculating. He had prepared for many scenarios, political rivalry audits, even a cabinet reshuffle, but not this tone, not this quiet fury. Ibrahim stood, walked slowly behind his chair, then continued speaking, not with the voice of a politician, but of a man who had walked through fire and emerged without illusion. When you lie to the people who trusted you, when you steal medicine from children and trade it for poison, when you bury good men and call it diplomacy, that's betrayal. And trust me, it has a smell. It's in this room, right now. Silence again. But now it was weaponized, heavy, unforgiving. Outside, the clock struck 8:04 a.m. Inside, justice was beginning its slow, deliberate walk to the table. The room fell into a tense, anticipatory silence as Colonel Damiba entered through the side door, a sealed briefcase clutched tightly in one hand, a laptop in the other. He did not speak. He simply walked to the far end of the table, placed the items down, and nodded once at President Traoré. Two technicians followed silently, setting up speakers and screens along the walls of the cabinet chamber with the efficiency of men who had rehearsed every second. The ministers watched, eyes narrowing. The atmosphere had shifted. "What was this?" President Traoré stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "What you're about to see and hear," he said, "are not rumors, not accusations. They are facts. Gathered over 43 days in 5 cities across 3 continents. 18 months of betrayal, neatly documented for history." Damiba opened the laptop and clicked a file. A voice filled the room. "The next shipment lands at Bobo's East Field. Mark the containers as pediatric vaccines. We've got clearance." It was Abdou Compaoré's voice. Smooth, in control, unmistakable. Compaoré blinked. His expression froze. For a moment it seemed as if the blood drained from his face. That could be AI deepfake. "You know how dangerous those tools are now?" he said, his tone calm, but with a tremble underneath. Without responding, Traoré gestured again. A second recording played. Dr. Traoré's voice, clinical and steady. "We'll move the penicillin crates to the back. Replace them with the Columbia stock. No one checks rural dispatch, too remote." Dr. Traoré inhaled slowly through her nose, spine straight. "Mr. President," she said softly, "context is everything. You must understand rural clinics need funding. We needed creative solutions. The money helped." Damiba clicked open a third file: bank statements, Swiss accounts, transfers from shell companies in Curaçao, Luxembourg, and Panama. A pattern of deposits, same amount, same days, same destinations. All traced back to ministers sitting at the table. Compaoré leaned forward, fists clenched on the lacquered wood. "Listen, all governments operate with shadow funding. We weren't hoarding the money. We were redistributing risk." "Redistributing risk." Traoré echoed, his voice suddenly cold. "Is that what you call it, when you let cocaine shipments kill thousands across the Sahel? When you let border officers like Colonel Sawogo die alone on a dirt road? Was that redistribution?" There was nowhere to hide. Damiba laid out printed documents, shipping manifests signed by Traoré herself. Authorizations from the Ministry of Transport rubber-stamped by Saradogo. Business registrations cross-referenced with Compaoré's offshore trusts. Each document was a confession neatly formatted and notarized. Saradogo hadn't said a word. Now he looked down at the table, jaw set not in denial but in grim acceptance. He did not argue. He didn't blink. Traoré tried once more. "We were helping people in our own way. The system failed us. We had to be." Traoré cut her off. "You stole medicine from dying children. You turned vaccines into decoys. You built fortunes on the corpses of the poor. And now you want to talk about systems." He stepped forward, voice rising, not shouting, but heavy with restrained fury. You wore the mask of service. You swore the oath of the people. But today, the masks fall. The screens turned black. The evidence was done speaking. The silence that followed was not of confusion, it was one of exposure. 3 ministers. 3 masks. No more lies to hide behind. The sound of boots echoed from the corridor before the doors burst open. 6 special operatives in black tactical gear entered the cabinet chamber, like shadows peeling off the walls, silent, synchronized, unmarked. Their faces were obscured, their weapons holstered, but their presence alone carried the weight of finality. They moved with deliberate control, spreading across the room until 2 flanked each of the accused ministers. The air shifted. What had once been a tense confrontation now took on the weight of reckoning. President Traoré remained still. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply rose from his chair and looked at the 3 he had once trusted with his country's most sacred responsibilities. Dr. Marie Traoré, Minister Umaru Saradogo, Minister Abdou Compaoré, he said, his voice calm but firm. You are under arrest for high treason, drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy against the state of Burkina Faso. The words settled like a gavel strike. Compaoré's chair screeched back. He shot up in panic, eyes darting for the nearest door. You can't do this. I built this government with you, he shouted, lunging. 2 operatives were already moving. In 3 swift steps, they tackled him to the marble floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the chamber, followed by the sharp click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. He struggled, shouting, "This is a trap. You'll regret this. You need me." But no one responded. The operatives lifted him effortlessly, face flushed, suit, crumpled eyes, wild with disbelief. Dr. Traoré rose with practiced dignity, brushing down her blazer as if preparing for a press conference rather than an arrest. She turned to the president, voice trembling beneath its poise. Mr. President, I've served this country faithfully for over 2 decades. I've sacrificed. Traoré's gaze never wavered. You sacrificed children for cocaine. She said nothing more as the cuffs closed around her wrists. Minister Saradogo did not speak. He simply stood waiting, shoulders squared. There was no denial in his expression, only resignation. As the operatives approached, he looked at Traoré, and for the first time in the entire room spoke from something resembling truth. I'm sorry about my brother. The words hung in the air, soft, sincere, too late. Traoré took a breath, heavy and filled with something that felt like mourning. You should be. He looked at the 3 former ministers, now criminals, their titles stripped by truth and law. Around them, the remaining cabinet sat frozen pale, unsure of whether to feel relief or terror. The thunder of justice had struck inches from their seats. To the 2 unaccused ministers, education and agriculture, Traoré gave a final glance. His voice was quieter now, but steel-lined. If you have anything to confess, now is the time. They both shook their heads quickly, eyes wide, fear pulsing through every gesture. Neither of them would sleep soundly that night. The special operatives led the arrested ministers out through the doors, each step a reminder that no rank, no wealth, no old alliance could shield one from justice. As the room emptied, Traoré stood alone, eyes locked on the place where Compaoré had fallen. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled, almost like letting go of a weight that had pressed on his chest for far too long. They thought power made them untouchable, he whispered. Then louder, firm for all who remained, you deserve exactly what you're getting. Dawn had barely broken when Operation Phoenix shifted from scalpel to sledgehammer. Within 90 minutes of the cabinet arrests, encrypted orders unfurled across secure channels, and every clean agent on Traoré's map went into motion. At the central bank, 2 auditors sworn to secrecy initiated an emergency freeze on 83 numbered accounts, all nested behind charity funds, agricultural grants, or microfinance projects that existed only on glossy brochures. 30 million euros seized in the first hour, another 12, as secondary banks in Zurich and Luxembourg complied with urgent mutual assistance requests. The cartel's bloodstream was being clotted in real time. Simultaneously, military trucks rumbled toward 3 remote warehouses, flagged by Demiba's team during the silent raids. The first outside Banfora had masqueraded as a fertilizer depot. Soldiers found only a few ripped sacks of urea stacked theatrically near the entrance, while deeper inside were pallets of caffeine powder an essential cutting agent worth millions on the European market. In Wahiguya, drone footage guided commandos to a disused textile mill whose chimney still puffed to suggest life. Below the looms, they uncovered a concealed loading bay, large enough to swallow a cargo plane's worth of narcotics. Every crate bore forged custom seals signed by an undersecretary, now sweating in an interrogation cell. But the most dramatic blow landed at Airstrip Delta, a gravel runway carved from Savannah 20 kilometers west of Kutugu. Official papers listed it as a humanitarian aid medevac site, yet no medevac had ever touched down there. At 07:12 a.m., a Beechcraft King Air descended toward the strip's faded windsock, its pilot expecting a smooth pickup of medical samples. Instead, he was met by armored vehicles fanned out across the tarmac barrels, angled upward like iron thorns. The aircraft surrendered without a shot fired. Inside, operatives discovered sealed coolers stuffed with half-kilo bricks, each stamped with the scorpion emblem that had become the silent signature of Burkina Faso's new narco-state dream, now crumbling. The financial thread led to a man who until that morning had been celebrated as the nation's most generous philanthropist, Samuel Sami Bachono, founder of the widely publicized Hands Over Hearts Foundation. Sammy's face smiled from billboards promoting free school breakfasts and rural water wells. He posed with presidents, ambassadors, Hollywood actors visiting on photo op tours. Yet the books told a darker story. For every dollar raised at high society galas in Paris, 3 moved quietly from shell companies in the Caymans into the cartel's Swiss pipeline, scrubbed clean under the guise of donor-matching funds. At 08:30 a.m., 2 plain sedans pulled up outside Sammy's glass-fronted headquarters in downtown Ouagadougou. Employees watched in bewildered silence as anti-corruption agents escorted their patron saint out in handcuffs, still wearing a lapel pin shaped like a water droplet. Inside his private office, investigators uncovered a second set of ledgers, hand-kept bound in red leather, itemizing every bribe to customs officials, every kickback to junior ministers, every charitable construction project that never broke ground. The final entry read, "Transfer 2.4 M your Phoenix contingency." Irony, Traoré mused when the report reached his desk. The code name chosen to hide their escape fund was the same word now, burning their empire to cinders. By midday, national television interrupted regular programming with a scrolling ticker of asset seizures, arrests, and frozen trusts. Viewers in cafes and market stalls cheered each new name, equal parts astonished and vindicated. For years, they had whispered that the rich were untouchable. Now they watched those very names tick past like a parade of defeated tyrants. In less than 6 hours, the cartel's money channels lay severed. Its storage hubs captured, its public mask ripped away. The web had been woven in secret for 18 months, but it collapsed in a single, merciless morning. The first bulletin crackled across state radio at 08:47 a.m. Sharp 3 cabinet ministers arrested on charges of high treason and drug trafficking, presidential statement to follow. The announcer's voice quivered with restrained excitement, as if he too were still processing what his tongue had just delivered to 5 million ears. In cafes along Ouagadougou's tree-lined avenue, Kwame Nkrumah, customers froze, spoons suspended above porcelain cups. Taxi drivers rolled down their windows so the next car could hear. By the time the broadcast repeated, smartphones were already vibrating with screenshots of the headline, hashtags multiplying in more French hula, and English hashtag no one above the law, hashtag Traoré, strikes, hashtag New Burkina. The story leapt from urban data towers to the dust-strung airwaves of the countryside. In Sapuy, a grain merchant balanced a radio on a sack of millet, so everyone in the Saturday market could listen between haggling bursts. When the reporter named Dr. Traoré women selling okra inhaled in disbelief, Mama Marie then erupted into overlapping arguments about moral masks and stolen vaccines. Moments later, the same vendor murmured almost apologetically that he had lost 2 nephews to bad medicine last year. A teenager beside him clenched his fists and whispered, "Maybe their ghosts can rest now." WhatsApp groups exploded with voice notes recorded in shaky whispers. A civil servant describing operatives seizing hard drives from the Ministry of Health. A fuel station attendant claiming he'd watched soldiers block an unfamiliar aircraft at a humanitarian airstrip. A cousin's cousin who swore she had just served coffee to undercover auditors at the central bank. Rumor and fact fused into a single electric current of possibility. Even seasoned cynics found themselves refreshing news feeds every 30 seconds, hungry for the next jolt of confirmation that yes, this time, the powerful really were being marched away in cuffs. Television soon joined the chorus. Birkin Info Channel cut its midday cooking show to stream live footage of seized warehouses, mountains of medical crates split open to reveal white bricks of cocaine. Reporters struggled to keep impartial tones as they stepped over forensic markers and read invoice numbers linking back to the arrested ministers. In a split-screen box, an anchor in the studio wiped a tear, then straightened her shoulders and declared, "This is not merely a scandal. This is a turning point." Viewers cheered at home, clapping at screens as if the applause could travel through glass and wire to reach the palace itself. By afternoon, social media transformed into an impromptu victory parade. Memes showed phoenixes rising from piles of money-laundered ash. A viral cartoon depicted President Traoré sweeping counterfeit banknotes into a trash bin shaped like a scorpion. Artists remixed protest chants from past marches, on Vola Justice overlaying them on dance beats that blasted from shopfront speakers. Hashtags now carried subtags. Hashtag Sawadogo Hero, honoring the fallen colonel. Hashtag Clean Hands Challenge, encouraging officials to post photos of empty offshore accounts. None had yet, but the dare lingered. Perhaps the most unexpected wave came from classrooms. Teachers seizing the moment assigned impromptu essays, "Write what justice means to you." In Kudugu, 9-year-old Aminata wrote, "I want to be president because President Traoré showed being brave is better than being rich." Her classmate Issouf drew a picture of a white truck with a red cross crossed out in bold red X's and labeled it "No More Lies." Photos of the essays hit Facebook, then the evening news igniting comment threads full of teary emojis and promises to donate school supplies. Yet amid the euphoria ran an undercurrent of wary awe. Older citizens remembered coups wrapped in righteous language only to sour into new tyrannies. So when a radio host in Dori asked listeners to call in with hopes and fears, a farmer's crackling voice summed up the national mood. "Today my heart is light, but I will sleep with one eye open. Justice has started now, it must finish." Across the country, heads nodded in agreement. But for the first time in a generation, that cautious nod was joined by a smile. At exactly 2:47 p.m., as the heat outside the capital baked the city streets into ripples, the heavy wooden doors of Burkina Faso's National Assembly opened, and silence fell like a curtain. Every seat was filled. Ministers, MPs, aides, even skeptical diplomats squeezed into the chamber, each wearing the kind of forced composure that comes from watching the unthinkable happen before lunch. The air buzzed not with chatter, but with caution. There had been no official announcement. Just a single line passed from aide to aide that morning, like a secret flame, "The president will speak." And now he did. Ibrahim Traoré entered without entourage. No ceremonial sash, no bodyguards flanking him. Only a dark plain suit and a folder tucked beneath his arm. His boots echoed with authority as he crossed the polished floor, and without waiting for a cue, he stepped directly to the central podium. He looked up once, sweeping his eyes slowly across the room, then placed the folder on the wood untouched. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. "If you think you're above the law," he began, his voice, low, steady, measured, like someone placing explosives carefully along a crack in stone leaf now. "I won't ask twice." No one moved. Not a breath. Not a cough. Not even a rustle of notes or fabric. He let the silence stretch. Let the weight of those words sink through bone and skin and ego. He could see it in their faces, some blinking faster, others tightening jaws, and a few shifting imperceptibly, like men hiding things under their skin. He had studied those faces before, but today he didn't see colleagues. He saw possibilities, redemption, resistance, and ruin. "When I took this office," he continued, "I inherited not just a seat or a title. I inherited rot. And I had two choices: live with the stench or cut out the infection." He pointed not wildly, not theatrically, just enough to gesture toward the 3 now empty seats once occupied by the ministers arrested hours earlier. They chose betrayal, and for that they are gone. But they were not alone. Murmurs flickered like sparks in dry grass, but died instantly under his gaze. "For too long, some of you have worn your positions like armor, untouchable, unquestionable, unimpeachable. Those days are finished. This government will not be a fortress for criminals in suits. From this moment on, loyalty means nothing without integrity. Rank means nothing without transparency. And if you sit here today thinking your secrets are still safe, I suggest you test your luck elsewhere. Again, silence. But this time it wasn't fear alone, it was awe. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't needed to. What echoed in that room wasn't volume, it was truth. Hard, unpolished, and inescapable. "I'm not offering mercy," he said at last. "I'm offering choice. Confess, return what you've stolen, help rebuild what you helped break, or stay silent and be dragged into the light." He stepped back, picked up the folder without opening it, and walked away. No applause followed, only a thunderous, breathless stillness and a reckoning. The phone rang at exactly 10:15 a.m. Ibrahim Traoré was still standing at the edge of his office window, watching from a distance as armored vehicles rolled toward another suspected warehouse in the Eastern District. The city was holding its breath. Radios crackled with breaking news. Social media feeds were imploding with the headline, "Ministers arrested for treason and drug trafficking." Then the presidential line blinked red. The caller ID read simply, "Ambassade de France." He let it ring once more, twice, then picked up. President Traoré came, the voice smooth and precise with the measured confidence of a man used to diplomacy shaping history. "This is Ambassador Valliere. I trust you are well, despite the dramatic developments in your government this morning." Ibrahim remained silent, eyes still fixed on the street below. "I won't waste your time," the ambassador continued. "There is growing concern here and among our partners. Concern that what we are witnessing may not be justice, but something else entirely. A purge, perhaps. Political revenge. The West remembers other African leaders who started with bold anti-corruption campaigns and ended with absolute power. France would like clarity. There was no mistaking the implication. Beneath the veil of polite diplomacy, the message was blunt. You've made enemies. Be careful what message you're sending. Traoré exhaled quietly, then turned from the window and walked back to his desk. His boots thudded softly against the marble floor. He picked up the small flash drive that had started it all and turned it between his fingers like a loaded coin. For a brief moment, he remembered Colonel Sawadogo's final words, "Don't trust them." There inside, he lifted the phone slowly back to his ear. "Let me make something clear," he said, voice low, composed, unshakable. "This isn't about politics." A pause. "This is war." Then he hung up. There was no anger in his gesture, no flourish of defiance, just a clean surgical cut like severing a gangrenous limb before it infected the rest of the body. Across the city, foreign observers scrambled. The French embassy began composing its internal assessment. Washington requested an immediate intelligence brief. The African Union issued a cautious statement urging respect for due process, but none of it mattered not to Ibrahim, because Ibrahim wasn't fighting for perception. He was fighting for survival, for truth, for a country that had been bought and sold too many times by men in suits, smiling over imported champagne while children in the North died for lack of a vaccine. That afternoon, his aides presented him with 3 drafts for public response to the international concerns. One was diplomatic and apologetic. One was firm but courteous. The third was blank. He chose the blank page. "This will not be a press release," he said calmly. "It will be a reckoning." And so he wrote it himself, every word. No spin, no politics, just truth. He titled it, "A Message to the World from a Country That Refuses to be Bought." And in it, he asked the question that would echo across embassies, media outlets, and boardrooms. If stopping criminals makes me an autocrat, then what does protecting them make you? That single sentence would be translated into 14 languages and quoted across international headlines. But for now, in that quiet office, all that mattered was one thing: Burkina Faso would not bow, not to criminals, not to silence, and not to pressure from any flag but its own. It started with a suitcase, leather-bound, polished, and heavy. Carlos Mendoza, a Venezuelan businessman with perfect English and a too-smooth smile, arrived in Ouagadougou under the guise of logistics consultation. But everyone in Traoré's intelligence circle knew what that meant. Mendoza wasn't here to consult. He was here to probe, to test, to tempt. And he found his target fast: Burkina Faso's customs office at the International Cargo Terminal. 3 mid-level officers, all of them with clean records, all of them recently promoted. Mendoza met them after hours in a quiet room above a cafe near the airport. He ordered red wine. None of the officers drank. He placed the suitcase on the table and clicked it open. Inside, stacks of crisp euro bills, 250 dollars in cash, and a promise of more if they looked the other way on several upcoming medical equipment shipments. Just a few boxes, no names, no questions. His pitch was smooth. So smooth, in fact, it was almost insulting. One of the officers, a woman named Lieutenant Asitu Yaro, leaned back in her chair. She was 34, mother of 2, had grown up in a village where her younger sister died from untreated malaria because the clinic had no medicine. She looked at Mendoza like he was a sickness. The meeting ended in under 10 minutes. No one took the suitcase. No one hesitated. No one asked, what if we get caught? They all walked directly into their department's internal affairs unit and reported every word of the bribe attempt. Within 36 hours, Carlos Mendoza was arrested at Ouagadougou Airport as he attempted to flee the country. His laptop was confiscated, and it revealed far more than anyone expected: details of similar corruption attempts in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Togo. Names, dates, payment schedules, even a list titled Most Vulnerable Officials. None of the names were from Burkina Faso. Not anymore. When Ibrahim Traoré read the report, he didn't smile. He simply nodded once, then whispered under his breath, "They didn't take the money." It was the first time in modern Burkina Faso that an entire customs team had not only refused a bribe, but had unanimously reported it without fear or delay. That moment would later be taught in public administration schools as the Mendoza test. But to the people of Burkina Faso, it was something more than policy. It was proof. Proof that the revolution wasn't just in speeches. It was in action. It was in culture. It was in the quiet, defiant dignity of men and women who had once been part of a broken machine and were now refusing to be its gears. Temptation had returned, but this time it found no cracks to seep into. Only walls of integrity built by sacrifice, pain, and one president's relentless war. And the message was clear in the new Burkina Faso: your price is your honor. And some things are no longer for sale. The praise came fast, but the criticism came faster. International media began to shift tone. Where once they called Ibrahim Traoré a reformer, now some headlines labeled him the strong man in reformer's clothing. Analysts speculated whether his crusade was a moral mission or a carefully orchestrated power grab. After all, hadn't other African leaders used anti-corruption campaigns to silence rivals and cement their rule? Inside the country, opposition voices echoed the same fear. Has he gone too far? Who will keep him in check? Traoré didn't respond immediately. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't release a statement defending himself. Instead, he did something no one expected, especially not his critics. He gave away power. On a humid Thursday morning with no fanfare, Traoré signed a presidential decree establishing an independent oversight council. Its members would be selected not by the president, but by a joint process involving the judiciary, civil society, and the National Assembly. Its mandate was clear: review all major government investigations, ensure due process, and publicly report any signs of abuse, including by the presidency. That same afternoon, he sent another bill to Parliament. It proposed constitutional amendments to limit the presidency to a single 5-year term. No exceptions, no extensions, not even for him. The Parliament chamber, still stunned from the anti-corruption wave, now sat in complete silence. No president in Burkina Faso's history had ever voluntarily restricted his own power. Traoré stood at the microphone, eyes calm, voice steady. "No one rules forever," he said, "not even the honest." It wasn't a grand speech. It didn't need to be. It was a statement of principle, and it landed with the force of a revolution. Critics were silenced not by fear, but by integrity. Allies were humbled. And the people, they understood what it meant. Their president was not here to reign, but to rebuild. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just fighting corruption, he was fighting history. And he was doing it by proving with every deliberate step that true power lies not in how long you hold it, but in how willingly you let it go. The world noticed. Burkina Faso's corruption index improved by 15 points, its highest leap in decades. Foreign direct investment surged by 40% as international partners returned with confidence. Aid money stopped disappearing into offshore accounts. In rural villages, something miraculous happened. Vaccines arrived on time. Clinics reopened. Roads got paved. Schools were built with bricks, not promises. And for the first time in years, government spending matched actual results. People no longer whispered about justice, they experienced it. And they began to believe that clean leadership wasn't a dream. It was policy. Justice didn't hide behind closed doors. The nation watched live broadcasts of the court trials. Screens were set up in public squares. Radios played every word. No censorship. No edits. The evidence was overwhelming. The judges spoke with calm authority. Dr. Traoré, once hailed as the mother of medicine, was sentenced to 25 years. Umaru Saradogo, the fallen minister and traitor to his own brother's sacrifice, got 30 years. Ibrahim, Abdou Compaoré, the mastermind, the cartel's favorite, was given life imprisonment without parole. Their luxury suits meant nothing. Their titles didn't save them. They fell as publicly as they once rose. And the people of Burkina Faso exhaled for the first time in years. Justice felt real. The sun was setting behind the National Assembly. Ibrahim Traoré stepped out alone. No motorcade, no bodyguards. Just a man walking among his people. He didn't need protection anymore. He had something stronger: trust. Then a small hand tugged his sleeve. A boy no older than 8 stood beside him, nervous, wide-eyed, and barefoot. "Mr. President," the boy said, "I'm not afraid of officials anymore." Traoré looked down, bent to his level, and smiled softly. "Good. That means I did my job." The whisper that had once warned of betrayal had become a roar of change. It echoed in classrooms, in courtrooms, and in every corner of a country that had once given up. And as Ibrahim Traoré walked toward the horizon, he didn't take power with him. He left something behind: a new standard, a new future, a new dawn. This story isn't just about corruption, it's about courage. Ibrahim Traoré stands as a symbol of the leader we all wish for: someone who chooses integrity over comfort and justice over loyalty. In a world where too many turn a blind eye to wrongdoing, he stared betrayal in the face and acted. What makes his journey powerful isn't just the arrests or the reforms, it's the emotional cost he was willing to pay. He exposed not strangers but people he once trusted. And that's what makes his decision extraordinary. But this story also reminds us that real change is possible not from power alone, but from principles. The whispers of truth, no matter how faint, can become a roar strong enough to shake a nation. One man listened, a country followed, and maybe that's the quiet truth behind it all. Change doesn't start with a crowd, it starts with one brave person saying enough. So let me ask you this: if you saw injustice happening around you at work, in your community, even among friends, would you risk comfort for what's right? And more importantly, would you be ready to stand alone even if no one clapped? If this story touched, you don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.